What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the Fair Weather Fan Podcast. My name is Anthony, and today I am going to be going over the Philadelphia Union MLS Cup chances, the Phillies playoff chances, and whether or not the Flyers are buyers or sellers at the trade deadline this year. I know it's kind of a weird topic, but given the way the Flyers have played recently, it's definitely something to consider. And then I'll finally close out the podcast talking about which Philly sports team has the best chance to win a championship sometime in the next 12 months. So if you're interested in a particular topic, I did this with the last video. I put all of the times that I'm going to be talking about these different topics in the description. So if you are only interested in a particular topic, you can just go ahead and click right to that. But if you're interested in the whole thing, then you can just watch the whole video. Anyway, let's get started with the Union MLS Cup chances. So I'm going to be completely honest with you. This podcast is called Fair Weather Fan, or the media project as a whole is called Fair Weather Fan for a reason. So I stopped watching the Union last year after the Orlando tournament, even though I was a season ticket holder for 2018 and 2019 and a partial season ticket holder in 2017. After that Orlando tournament defeat, I think the Union came out, and it was a typical Union game. They immediately gave up a bunch of goals, or like 2 goals or something like that. Um, you know, completely just didn't even bother to show up for that game. I think it was against Portland as well. Let me just make sure that what I'm saying is factual. Portland wound up winning it all, and I know that's who the Union played. Yeah, they lost 2-1. They gave up that first goal at the 13th minute, which is pretty typical of the Union in a big game, giving up a goal in the first 15 minutes. That's kind of what they do. Wound up giving up a second one at the 70th minute. Andrew Wooten scored a goal in the 85th minute. He's new, obviously. He hasn't been with the team for that long, so, he hasn't been messed with by Jim Curtin. He hasn't been pessimistic about the team's chances yet late in games when they're down by 2. So, of course, he scored a goal. And then the Philadelphia Union lost that game 2-1. Typical Union fashion. After a great tournament, they get on national television, and they lose. Sergio Santos apparently was 6th in goals in this tournament. That's pretty good for him. But anyway, fast forward to this year. We've got kind of a new Union team. They brought in some guys. No one's going to replace Aronson, really. I mean, Aronson was pretty much their, shining star academy product. The problem with this team that nobody will acknowledge is that they cannot play in big games to save their lives. And do you know whose fault that is? It's entirely Jim Curtin's fault. And they brought in Ernst Tanner to kind of, make sure that this wasn't as bad. Make sure that, when we brought Ernst Tanner in, the expectation was, okay, now we're going to be able to perform. We're going to be up there with the top clubs in the MLS, and nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. Before Ernst Tanner, they lost 3 out of 5 U.S. Open Cup finals, and I know the last one was also kind of on the same front of they gave up 2 goals before halftime. That was the U.S. Open Cup in 2018, I believe. So after all that, they get to the U.S. Open Cup final. Yeah, they give up a goal in the 4th minute and the 25th minute. If that doesn't scream Union, then what does? Like I said, early goal, obviously, within the first 15 minutes. They always have to do that. And then, of course, Austin Trusty gave up a goal. He plays for Colorado now. Wow. Good. He was good for all of about 1 season, and then just declined from there. But yeah, all this new investment, they brought in Kevin Durant. Um, they brought in Ernst Tanner to fix the problem with the club. They hadn't been doing well. Um, in previous seasons, they'd barely just get into the playoffs. What happened with them in 2018? I forget. I know they missed the playoffs in 2017. In 2018, that was a New York City FC loss. After they basically went from a third seed to a sixth seed on the final day. Um, Another game in which I believe they gave up a goal in the first 15 minutes because, like I said, they come out of the gate and they cannot play in big games. 2015, they lost to Sporting Kansas City in the U.S. Open Cup. Yeah, that was 2015. 2014, they lost to the Seattle Sounders. Um, that actually went to penalties. So good for them. Although I don't know what type of format they were using back then. Um, but yeah, and they lost in penalties the next year as well. They didn't even bother to show up a few years later. So I'm pessimistic. I'm pessimistic about the Union's MLS Cup chances. 2019 was a great year for the Union because they finally made the playoffs, and things looked bleak when they went down 3-1 to the Red Bulls. But they somehow were able to win that game. That was their best game in franchise history. It was their only playoff win. I was at that game. And leaving the stadium that day, even though they went down 3-1, Andre Blake made a few mistakes, but he'd been pretty consistent all season. And so that was kind of bad. I know the first goal he gave up in the Atlanta game in the next round was also bad. But leaving the stadium that day, it felt like, okay, you know what? This team, they have a chance to go all the way, but if they don't go all the way, they at least have their first playoff win. If they lose to Atlanta, they're losing to a better team. At the very least, they won't choke versus Atlanta because they're not in a position in which they really could choke. They were the underdogs going to that game. And then they lost, and they didn't have Shibilko, so it was all forgiven. And so they come back next season. They almost get to the final of that MLS's back tournament. And then they, of course, give up a goal in the first 15 minutes and lose. And that's a point where I realized, okay, I know where this is heading. Pretty much the same way it always heads. They finally won their first trophy. The Supporter Shield isn't really like something to brag about. I don't know why the Union feel like it is. Their social media promotes it constantly. You play in the United States. I was talking about this in the last podcast. Our sports run so that we award champions not based on who the best team is, but who gets through a tournament, gets all the way to the end of the tournament and wins that final game. That's how we award champions. The Supporter Shield, no one cares except for like the team that wins it, but no one else in the league cares if you win the Supporter Shield. And so they won the Supporter Shield, I guess, and felt like that was enough. They go in the playoffs and they lose to New England of all teams. I mean, the 7th seeded New England Revolution. Let's see, how well did these guys perform last? I mean, hold on, let me find it. Well, they lost 2-0. Oh, it was actually an 8th seed. My apologies. Yeah, because of the expanded playoffs. So that's even worse. There you go. Philadelphia Union Supporter Shield winners. Woohoo! 47 points, over 2 points per game. More than any other team in the MLS. And they lost the 15th seed New England Revolution, who had 7 losses, 8 draws, and only 8 wins. And the Union come in with 6 higher wins, 4 less losses, and or 3 less losses, and let's see, 3 fewer ties as well. That's just sad. Atlanta really had a bad season last year, but I mean, some of that has to be um, because they are still kind of reeling from losing Miguel Almiron. But like I said, I didn't pay attention too much to the MLS last season. You know, there were so many other sports going on. There was hockey going on. There was basketball playoff going on. You know, even though the Union were good, their inevitable collapse in the playoffs is something that teams around the league can pretty much look forward to every year. They're tied for fifth in probability to win the MLS Cup, and that's probably like a power ranking. And I would say that's generous at best, considering that this team has one total playoff win in their entire franchise history. And that was that game that they almost lost 3-1 to the New York Red Bulls in. But that was all that was Andre Blake's fault. That wasn't really Jim. I mean, you could blame the goals that Blake gave up on Jim Curtin because he should have better prepared him for the game. What Jim Curtin needs to do, Jim Curtin stands there. Okay, this is his coaching style. He stands there on the sidelines. He's a really analytical guy, I feel like. Like, behind the scenes, I feel like he goes into the film room with the guys and just starts spouting off statistics, telling them, like, okay, when the ball is in our final third, 96% of the time, the team passes the ball into the middle or something stupid like that. So we have to make sure that when the team gets into the final third of the field, and you have to be conscientious of where the final third is, that you guard the middle better. Like, okay, that's great. So that'll get us to the playoffs. That'll get us at least to the U.S. Open Cup final because there's no pressure the whole way through. But when you have to play on primetime television and you're spewing statistics in the locker room before the game, that's not going to work. Get these guys amped up. They come out of the gate in all these big games and they look like they couldn't care less about what happens. They look like the pregame pep talk was brought to you by the local library. So, anyway, let's move on to another topic now. I could rant about the Union all day, and I have ranted about the Union a lot in the past, and they completely deserve it. But let's move on to a somewhat lighter topic, the Phillies' playoff chances this season. I think it's going to be difficult for them to make the playoffs. They're last in the MLB playoff rankings of all the teams in the NL East. They're even below the Nationals. They're 18th, I think. But they have a bullpen now. I feel like they're very underrated this season by the MLB. I feel like they're going to beat the Nationals out. At the very least, they're going to beat the Nationals out. Oh, I'm sorry. They're not last. They're second to last because the Marlins are always below them, I believe. Let me just double check that. But the Marlins aren't making the playoffs. That's not even a question. The Marlins are 21st. The Phillies are 18th. Phillies are not only 3 teams better than the Marlins. That's kind of a joke, especially with all the bullpen upgrades that they did this offseason. They brought back Real Muto. They brought back Gregorius. It's kind of stupid to think that they're the 18th best team. Let's see what this other website says. Scrolling down. Of course, they got to put pictures on this. Postseason hopefuls. Philadelphia Phillies 12th. That makes sense. They're right below the Athletics in this list. They're above the Nationals. They're obviously above the Marlins, who consistently suck. So here's what has to happen from my perspective. The Mets or Braves need to underperform. Because you've got to make the playoffs somehow. And because of the way the stupid postseason is set up, which also needs to change, the Padres are going to be a wild card team. It's not going to be the Dodgers. They're playing a 162-game season. The Dodgers pretty much have the NL West in the bag. The Padres are 100%. With that rotation, with that rotation and that lineup, the Padres are going to be the second best team in the National League. So they've got that wild card spot locked up. So you're basically competing with the Mets and the Braves, and I don't think the Braves are going to drop off too much. I think Drew Smyly is a little bit overhyped, but Charlie Morton, I guess we'll see if he falls off. I think that might be something to look out for this season. I mean, he's almost 40 now, isn't he? How old is Charlie Morton? He's 37. Okay. And he'll actually be 38 by the end of the season, by November. So I would look for him to drop off because that could really be detrimental to the Braves' rotation. And then the Mets. So I know they got a lot of players this offseason. Francisco Lindor, James McCann. The rotation now features Carlos Carrasco. That's pretty good for them too. I think that the Mets are a solid pick for that last wild card spot. And they've still got guys like Pete Alonso, Jeff McNeil, Jonathan Villar. But they've got a pretty good team. So I think one of those teams has to underperform. Either Charlie Morton hits a brick wall and the Braves are forced to make some moves in the rotation and they wind up losing pitching and they wind up losing they wind up losing games because of a lack of pitching. But either that or the Mets somehow have to fall off, but I think that might actually be less likely even though they're rated lower than the Braves. Or, even if players on either team get injured and the Phillies stay relatively healthy, that could definitely play to their benefit. And obviously, you don't hope for anybody to get injured, but those are the two ways that I see the Phillies making the playoffs. And the offense for the Phillies must also be consistent. In 2019, I remember their offense was they would put up 6, 7, 8 runs, 9 runs sometimes on one day, and then the very next day against the same team, against even probably a worse pitcher, they would put up 1 or 2 runs and would lose 4-2. I think that, like I said before, the Padres are locks for that first wild card spot, but I think the Phillies are they could contest for that second wild card spot, but I'd rather that they make the playoffs and lose to the Padres in that game than not make it at all. And in the wild card round, who knows what can happen? I mean, the Brewers were a few outs away from beating the Nationals in the wild card game in 2019, and they wound up losing that game. Because the Nationals put together one really good inning, and they wound up winning 4-3, and they went on to win the World Series. Just imagine if the Brewers got the last few outs of that game. I mean, it would have been a really different playoff picture. And then you go on to play the Dodgers, but that's another story. They're going to lose in the NLDS if they get past the Padres. It'd just be cool for them to get that far. But yeah. Anyways, let's move on to the Philadelphia Flyers. Oh boy. I love talking about the Flyers because there's always pessimism when I talk about the Flyers because they haven't won anything. So we're 4 weeks out from the trade deadline. A lot of Flyers fans are calling for the Flyers to get Matthias Ekholm. And I'm one of those fans. But yesterday, after the Flyers blew that 2-0 lead and they were trailing 3-2, and then they were trailing again 4-3, I was kind of just sitting there thinking about, are the Flyers even contenders for the playoffs? Like, even if they got Ekholm, would they be a lock for the playoffs then? And in my eyes, I don't see the Bruins missing the playoffs. They hit a bit of a slump right now. Every team hits slumps over the course of the season, but you know, I don't think that the Bruins are going to miss the playoffs. Especially because they're still, I think, one of the highest rated teams in the power rankings. So you're either going to have to get to Pittsburgh, Washington, or the Islanders. And the Islanders and Capitals are locks in my eyes. So it's really going to have to be Pittsburgh. And Pittsburgh, they're on a hot streak right now. They're on a 6-game win streak. That could change. All it takes is that win streak ends and they wind up going 5-5 after that for the next 10 games. And that could be really good for the Flyers because their upcoming schedule is so easy. And so these next 9 games, I think, are going to be really critical for the Flyers because they play the Islanders, who are a good team. I mean, they're going to make the playoffs. They're at least going to be the 2nd seed in the East Division, if not the 1st seed. So that's going to be a good test for the Flyers after they finish this current series versus the Islanders. So I say that, first of all, they have to beat the Islanders in 2 of those 3 games. I mean, even if, you just completely, pull a 6-1 and lose by that score against the Islanders in one of the games, if you win the other 2, I don't care. So long as that 6-1 game is in the first one. If it's a second or third, okay. But you have to prove that you're legit, you at least have to pick up 3 of 6 points in that series. And I think that they need to, in the next 9 games that they have, which will close out March, they need to pick up 14 of 18 points, or even 13 of 18 points if they wind up losing the series to the Islanders, but they wind up losing one of the games in overtime. So you can easily pick up 14 in the next 18 points, even without winning every game versus the Rangers. If you sweep the Sabres, you beat the Devils in the one game they play, you win 2 of 3 versus the Islanders, or even win 1 and then drop a game in overtime, that's 13 or 14 points right there. And if the Penguins get off their winning streak and they start losing games again, or even if the Bruins wind up out of a playoff spot, you could wind up in the 4th position, and that makes it easier for a guy like Ekholm to come in and push this team over the top into the playoffs. And I know Nashville has scouts that have been going to Lehigh Valley games. I think that the Flyers are probably going to wait a couple of weeks to make an official offer for Ekholm. But the next 9 games are really critical because it's a Mickey Mouse schedule. It is. It's a Mickey Mouse schedule. You're playing the 3 worst teams in the division and then the best team in the division. So even if you lose 2 games against the Isles, 1 in overtime, like I said, and you win, let's see, how many games is this? 3 versus the Rangers, 2 versus the Devils, or 2 versus Sabres, and 1 versus the Devils. So that's 6 games. So even if you win 5 of those 6 games, which isn't that high of a feat, I mean, those are the worst teams in the division, then you have a really good chance of making the playoffs. But, that first step is just having a good showing versus the Islanders, beating the Rangers in this upcoming game. And, I'm not saying that the Flyers should win these games because they're easy. I'm saying that if they were a real contending team, they would win these games. And that's why it's going to be interesting to watch these games over the course of the next few weeks. 2 weeks, basically. Because they jammed 9 games into the span of 14 days or so for the Flyers. Alright. Lastly, I wanted to talk about this because, it's kind of relevant right now. We're at a point in sports where there are some leagues that are about to start. Usually, it's kind of like, you start having to make predictions in September and before the NFL, NBA, and NHL seasons start. And then before the Phillies and Union start in usually February, but this year it's March. Which Philly team has the best chance at a championship in the next 12 months? I think I'm going to go through each team one by one. And I'll start with the team with the worst chance. And no surprise, it's Nick Sirianni's Philadelphia Eagles. They're going to go 3-13 probably at best. No, you know what? At best, they'll go 5-11. But my prediction is 3-13. They've got a guy who's never called a play in his life. It's going to be a train wreck. And hopefully Howie Roseman at that point will finally be fired. Even though I said that the Phillies might have a chance, I'm kind of pessimistic about their chances. I would put them 4th on this list. Just because the MLB playoffs are really stupid. If they had a 6th, like they had it like the NFL playoffs used to be, where the 3 versus 6 seed play, and then the 4 versus 5 seed play, and then the winners of those play the 1 versus 2, or the 1 or 2 seed, that would make a lot of sense. The 6th seed never deserves to be left out of the playoffs in the MLB. It's always the case. The 6th seed has always belonged in the playoffs. But that's not the case with the MLB right now. And it probably never will be, or at least not in the next few years, because Rob Manfred has no idea what he's doing. So I'm pessimistic about the Phillies' chances with the loaded NL East. I think that the Union are 3rd on this list because they're guaranteed to choke in the playoffs under Jim Curtin. They do so every year. So, I don't think they're going to win the MLS Cup, no matter how high they rank them. The only reason they're above the Phillies is because on the power rankings, they think that, or they rated the Union higher than the Phillies are rated. So that's the only reason they're 3rd instead of 4th. So I think it comes down to either the Sixers or Flyers, and I personally think the Sixers have the best chance. If the Flyers can make it into the playoffs, though, anything can happen. I mean, just look at some of the teams that won the Stanley Cup, or at least made it to the Stanley Cup in the past decade alone. I mean, the Kings did it as an 8th seed in 2012. The Preds almost did it as an 8th seed in 2017. The Blues went from last in the league to the Stanley Cup champions in 2019. So, if the Flyers can make it in, if they make a few trades, fix up that Swiss cheese defense, and make it into the playoffs, I think they definitely have a chance at winning the Stanley Cup. I mean, at least getting far enough that, you wind up. They honestly, if they're the lowest seed, they could wind up playing the Leafs. And the Leafs haven't played anybody this year, so they could easily, if they win that series, they could get to the Stanley Cup, and then who knows at that point. But anyway, for the Sixers, I say you need Kyle Lowry to propel you past the Nets. The rhetoric right now is that the Nets have a loaded team and they're well on their way to the NBA final. But we don't know if the Sixers are going to get Lowry or not, and that would make for a huge big three. I mean, Embiid is the best player in the league this season, without a doubt. He's not going to win MVP because he's injured. So Jokic is going to win MVP. But Embiid is the best player in the league this season. Simmons is really good as well. And I was talking about this in the last podcast. Simmons is going to be the defensive player of the year, most likely. Tobias Harris, while he's overpaid, is definitely not overrated. He's extremely good. So if you add Kyle Lowry to that mix, that's a pretty strong set of four guys. I mean, that's as close as you're going to get to that 2019 team, which was also stacked, by the way, and they never should have given up on half of those guys. I mean, they let Jimmy Butler walk. But yeah, and I think that might even be a better team than that 2019 team. I mean, Jimmy Butler is a great player, yes, but I mean, who was it that? It was Embiid, Simmons, Butler, Harris. I wouldn't say Lowry is better than Butler, but I would say that this team is deeper, a lot deeper than it was in 2019. I mean, they actually have a bench now that consists of guys like Matisse Thybulle, Dwight Howard. As much as people don't like him for his inconsistency, Furkan Korkmaz, Shake Milton. I mean, these guys are deep. And if they wind up giving up Seth Curry in the process, if they wind up giving up Danny Green in the process, and who's the other guy that they said they might give up? Even if they give up like Maxey or somebody, I still think they're deep enough on the bench and and in their starting lineup that they have the best chance out of all these teams to win a title. So yeah, hopefully they will. Hopefully they'll get Lowry or someone else that can really boost them and kind of solidify them as the first or second seed. My main concern is that by the end of the season, depending on how the teams below them perform and how they perform in the next few weeks without Embiid, because the three teams behind them are really good. My concern is that they're going to drop to the fourth seed. Because, okay, so they've won 5 straight. That's good. The Nets have won 5 straight and 9 of their last 10. The Bucks have won 4 straight and 9 of their last 10. Miami has won 4 straight and also 9 of their last 10. Boston, I don't think Boston's going to catch up to them. It really depends on, if the Heat stay hot, which they probably will. If they can beat the Bucks tomorrow. I think they play the Bucks tomorrow. Yeah. At the Wells Fargo Center, so that's good. I just hope they get the second seed at the very least. If they want, and it's kind of inevitable at this point that they're going to fall out of that first seed. I mean, Brooklyn is really good. It just depends on who the Sixers can get that can match up against Brooklyn. Because Brooklyn doesn't have defense. And you know what they say about defense winning championships. So if the Sixers' defense can help them get past the Nets, that would be great. So, out of all the teams, out of all the Philly teams, I would say the Sixers have the best chance at winning a championship. The Flyers are second. The Union are third. The Phillies are fourth. And the Eagles are sixth behind the Fusion. Because the Eagles probably have like a 0.1% chance at even making the playoffs. But anyway, that's going to be it for this podcast. Thank you, everybody, so much for listening. If you want to follow me on social media, my accounts are at FairweatherPhan, Phan. The links can be found in the description. Also, a link to the website can be found in the description. It's fairweatherfan.weebly.com. Sixers vs. Knicks tonight. It's going on probably as this is uploading, most likely. It's almost 7:30 by the time I'm finishing this. So let's hope for a Sixers win. I think the Nets play tomorrow. I don't think the Nets play tonight. And I don't know who the Nets play. They play the Pacers, so they're probably going to win. So yeah, it's going to be a struggle for the Sixers to keep that first seed for that much longer, especially with this loaded schedule coming up. But anyway, thank you all so much for watching or listening. Also, on the YouTube video, the Spotify link will be down in the description if that's more your style, how you get your podcast, stuff like that. But anyway, again, thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.